If the government can interfere with private contracts because the enforcement or execution of those contracts becomes unpopular, then the government can interfere with anything. And as you know, contracts have to mean what they say. The obligation of contract is uniquely, and in those words, the obligation of contract, protected from governmental interference in the Constitution, because the framers knew that just then, just like today, binding contract is an essential building block of the free market.
Yeah, but when they wrote that, we didn't have credit swaps or mortgage derivatives, right?
Correct.
And we didn't have the government coming in and taking over banks. Of course, we didn't have banks then either. But you know, saying that all of a sudden the rules are off and the rules go away for enterprises, this is their argument,
right,
when you bail them out with taxpayer dollars.
But the Congress can't change the Constitution because they took an oath to uphold it. They are the creature. The Constitution is the creator. Now,
so
I don't
what
know
are you
anything
fearing?
about,
what are you fearing this leads to?
I am fearing that the camel's nose is under the tent, so to speak, and the government has found an excuse, a popular, rationally based excuse, to interfere with privately entered into contracts. And if it can do it in this case, where there are arguably government dollars and where the public is outraged and where the public servants are doing what they think the voters want them to do, they can do it in many other cases as well. And that will lead us to a form of central planning unlike anything since the old Soviet Union.
If you were with us yesterday, you saw our chief judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano, on the program yesterday. He told us about a conversation that he had with the head of a bank. The person told the judge that the government forced his bank to take the bailout funds by threatening to hold a public audit of the company. The judge boiled down the accusations in this exchange. Listen. And you say, on behalf of the Bush administration, this was
extortion. This occurred in September of 2008. Extortion is an attempt to control somebody else's free will by threatening to perform a lawful act. Is an audit lawful? Absolutely. Is the threat to engage in an audit in order to force them to sell stock to the federal government lawful? Of course not. It's a crime.
Judge Napolitano is accusing the federal government under the Bush administration of committing extortion. If that's the case, who prosecutes?
Well, that's an interesting question because you have to have a victim. You have to have somebody who's willing to come forward with this.
So where's your bank head with whom you had dinner the other night? Why not get that person in here?
I would love to, and I since have made efforts to do so, but because of the amount of money involved and the responsibility to board members and shareholders who may lack the personal courage of this particular person who spoke with me, there's an unwillingness to take on the government. Look, governments have been doing this for many years, cowing people into doing things that they have a free will not to do. However, there are instances in which the federal government has indicted its own officials for committing crimes. There's instances in which a state government has indicted federal officials for committing state crimes, because extortion is against the law of all 50 states as well as against federal law.
It's pretty, you know, I've heard the Bush administration and George Bush himself accused of a lot of things from a lot of different people. But for someone who is a former Superior Court judge in the state of New Jersey and carries a lot of weight around here, to accuse the former president of extortion, a very serious felony which could land you in jail for a long time.
My accusation was not against the president personally. I doubt that the president personally was even aware of what went on. The people who pressured this banker into creating a class of stock,
Hank Paulson,
which only the feds could own, was the Treasury Department, unnamed persons, and the FDIC, unnamed persons. It is, in fact, the FDIC that has the power to audit any bank at any time.
That's Sheila Bair.
I don't know if she was the head of the FDIC at the time, but she is now. If the FDIC audits a bank because they believe the bank should be audited, that's perfectly lawful. But if they threaten to audit the bank in order to get the bank to do something it doesn't want to do, then that's unlawful, even though they have the right to audit.
You know, what we've seen lately is something maybe equally nefarious or even more so with these bonuses going on with AIG. It was a very popular thing to do in the early going. You can't have those bonuses. You ruin the company. You ruin the country, but they had a contract. And then Elliot Spitzer went what amounts to door to door, going, you need to give that up. Better give that up.
Listen, if the federal government gets in the business of breaking contracts it's going to be miserable for everybody. You take your
Well,
card.
they didn't have to break the contract. All they had to do was threaten to out them, to put their names out there.
That's exactly what Attorney General Cuomo in New York and Attorney General Blumenthal in Connecticut did. Literally, like Joe McCarthy, I have in my hand a list, and I'm going to read your name and your address and the amount you earned from this list unless you give the money back. That violates federal privacy laws, and it violates federal extortion laws. That's the same act, threatening to do a lawful act in order to force somebody to do something they don't want to do. You can't do that in this country.
So 2 attorney generals are now guilty of extortion as well in your mind.
Absolutely.
Andrew Cuomo.
Andrew Cuomo and Richard Blumenthal did virtually the same thing, threatened to expose the recipients of lawful payments from AIG, to expose them to public wrath and maybe even the security of their homes and families in order to get them to give up money that they had lawfully earned.
If you're so sure that there's extortion everywhere, why in the world is nobody jumping up and down screaming about it?
Because the public is on the side of the government, because we have demonized those who have been extorted, and public sentiment lets you get away with a whole host of things, Chap. The government is interested in 2 things: power and keeping power.